Hi, we are setting up and we're going to start. This is now Bridge to a Better World in just moments. And so I will be doing the by now traditional um, setting of the toys. And this one has a globe and jets going around it. So I'm just going to push this down here. And this means that we will return shortly and start the show. Rattly, isn't it?
And I now turn on the Do Not Disturb light. Let's try that. See you at 9. Oh, look, it's 9. See you in a minute.
Come on, go for a spacewalk, space guy. There you go. What he gets for getting into airspace. All right, we will shortly have This Is Now Bridge to a Better World. He exterminated himself.
Goodness.
He's getting aggro now. I mean, for a Dalek, probably doesn't take much.
Daleks are kind of known for their aggro. They kind of brought the aggro to the party.
Indeed they did. Don't they though?
Morning.
Shall we?
Let's.
All right. This is now Bridge to a Better World. I'm Teresius. This is Ani Raven. And we'd like to start with headlines. The UN has made it clear that to stop the pandemic, the rich countries, that's us, need to buckle down and cough up 6 billion vaccine doses and get them distributed. Not a big deal, right? Well, it's the truth that it's costly, but the expense doesn't hold a candle to the trillions the U.S. spends on war and the goddamn nuclear armament renewal and upgrade program that Biden is cranking up right now. Biden is even using the vaccine for warfare, denying it to Venezuelans under the usual trumped-up excuses. Bill Gates is personally responsible for untold millions of COVID deaths over the next few years, as he insisted that at first no exceptions could be granted for his investment in the precious profitable patents. And now he's backing off and saying, well, maybe this and that temporarily. COVID is a great enabler, it turns out, for imperialism and racism and capitalism. So the deaths and mutations will march on as the great leaders pour mouth and evade their responsibility. 6 billion doses are shut up about human rights, Mr. Biden. You can't have human rights when you're dead of a virus. The Ring doorbell camera service offers a handy way to keep track of visitors or porch pirates, and it also sends every bit of its video and audio data to Amazon for their extensive processing and profit. Every Ring doorbell camera offers warrant-free browsing for local federal and state cops via Amazon Incorporated, which evidently isn't worried about whether the police might want the footage just to spy on their wives and watch them scratch their ass out the way out the door or harass dissidents. And now Amazon is saying the cops have to make their request public, but they're not stopping the service nor recognizing the intent of the Fourth Amendment against unwarranted search and seizure. It's corporate world now, and likewise, Amazon says they won't offer their facial recognition program to cops for now, subject to Amazon's whim to change their policy. The Big Brother surveillance that results from Bezos' easy relations with the police state is now a fact of life under billionaire rule. And speaking of our rulers, Oregon Representative Mike Neerman, known for that video of letting raging fascists through the door to the State House last December, finally got his butt kicked out of the legislature. The vote was 69-1 and included all the Republicans. How about that? Except Mike. Neerman was given a chance to speak for himself, and he used it to issue platitudes and evasions about access to legislators. Here's hoping this is a precursor to similar expulsions from the U.S. Congress.
Sorry, I don't mean to distract. I'm just trying to do that technical advising from the sidelines.
Right on.
Pull the camera to you. Carry on, my dear.
Yes, thank you very much. Peace advocates and pro-Palestinian groups in the United States are calling on President Joe Biden to halt a $735 million sale of precision-guided bombs to Israel. The Biden administration is fast-tracked. This is from Radio Havana, Cuba. They write, Hawaida Araf, speaking for the National Lawyers Guild, said, quote, "We are knowingly transferring weapons to a country that is not only engaged in aggression, but also a massive violation of human rights. Our government is enabling Israel not just with the billions of dollars that we send there, but by shielding Israel from any kind of accountability," end quote. A coalition of more than 100 groups, including Churches for Middle East Peace, Jewish Voice for Peace, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and Democratic-leaning political groups, Justice Democrats, Move On, Indivisible, and the Sunrise Movement, signed an open letter to Biden saying, quote, "The planned arms sales to Israel would send a signal of support for Israel's recent conduct in occupied Gaza and East Jerusalem, which includes likely violations of international humanitarian law."
Slow down. Take a deep breath. I'm like, tell me more about that, because that's I do want to know more, and it's kind of going by in a clip. It's just a thing. Slow down.
Yes, I will slow down now and tell you. Actually, that I do think about things when I read those things from Radio Havana. Cuba's still under a vicious blockade, and that includes medicines, and they really have to scrape and dodge and sneak things just like X-ray machines. I remember when I was there in '96, they proudly showed me a Philips X-ray machine, which they had smuggled in. And how ridiculous is that? That the United States won't let Cuba smuggle in an X-ray machine, because they're going to, I don't know what the excuse is, just ridiculous. And it's horrible. And Cuba does pretty well. I mean, they're poor, but honestly, the distribution of wealth in Cuba is very, very good compared to the United States, where it's very, very bad. And it's just ongoing. And it's the same aggression that's being applied to Venezuela. And the U.S. has always applied it to any state which does not knuckle under to imperial rule. The same imperial rulers who talk about freedom and democracy, and democracy means a punch in the head whenever they get a chance, and that's the way it's working out in Cuba.
Well, and it's a hegemonic control that is imperialism. That is the U.S. safeguarding democracy.
Yeah, and
around the world. And when I say democracy, we saw what do we call that? The satire, the sarcasm rolling off that word. We don't safeguard democracy. We safeguard capitalism, rather the antithesis.
Yeah, and something just went right out of my head there. I was going to.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's not you. But okay, so I was going to say that the thing that bugs me about this is imperialism. I probably don't need to tell you is vicious. It's racist, and it goes on untrammeled and invisible. And we've been very well trained. We were trained after the explosions in New York in 2001 to believe that it's a righteous cause rather than an effort to get profits. I mean, in Afghanistan, it's about lithium, it's about copper, and it's about billions of dollars in profits, trillions in the end run. And it's about just ruling people, which the United States has gotten very used to doing. And for it to be invisible, for us to live in the United States and to elect powerful political parties and just assume that imperialism is just okay. It's what we do, but it's grotesquely immoral, and we must stop. We must stop imperialism. And it defines our society. The viciousness of our police state is very much about making our police imperial soldiers and using the same equipment often to rule us rather than to keep us safe. So I could rant on and on about that, frankly.
Thank you. I mean, I thanks for unpacking that a little bit more. I appreciate it.
Shall I talk about meritocracy, or did you want to lead off about human rights?
Oh, well, we could go either of those directions. Yeah, okay. Why don't we pivot a little bit? As you were mentioning just now, Teresa. Well, actually, were you? You weren't mentioning yet. Let's talk about human rights.
All right.
I might have lost my place as to where you were, but where am I? Pulling myself out of my technical advisor role and into my own commentary. I was this week, one of the things that I've been struck by, two things this week, super hard. And that is Harris's visit, Vice President Harris's visit to Guatemala. This is her first international visit. And what you're talking about, imperialism, really, it's part and parcel with this visit. I want to look at the U.S.'s role in the immigration crisis that is upon us, right? We have been talking a lot for the last 4 years about immigration, the crisis at the southern border. Depending on your political leanings and how you're reading it, that crisis is a few different things. And so, looking at some roots, as radicals, I thought we should really, again, look at the root causes of that immigration. And basically, it comes down to three things. One, violence, the war, civil war, cartels, corruption. There is a cycle of violence that is playing out in Mexico, in Central America, and in Latin American countries. And it's a similar scenario throughout. There's also climate change, environmental disasters, unprecedented stresses on climate, and then crushing poverty, which accelerates and worsens the first two factors. So U.S. neoliberalism is a driving factor in all three of these, these factors. It's a driving force in all three of these factors. So I want to break that down just a little bit. Violence. As the U.S. fights to defend capitalism and corporate interests, we wrongly identify them and define them as America's interests, right? We often hear talk about how we have to safeguard American interests in these countries, in these foreign lands. And that was certainly true throughout Latin America. It's also true throughout the Middle East and wherever you see American military involvement.
Safeguarding.
So we arm militaries and paramilitaries to combat environmentalists and to combat land rights activists and trade unionists and left economic organizers. Check out the wars in Latin America and Central America in the 70s and 80s that the US's CIA was fully involved with. If you're not familiar with that history, I recommend Eduardo Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America. Also, Michael Parenti's The Sword and the Dollar, which looks at the way the CIA and the School of the Americas enforce regime change, basically. If your country was silly enough to elect a leader that was going to look out for its population, America needed to do something about that, because that would not be good for America's interests. So I recommend Parenti's work, The Sword and the Dollar, I recommend anything by Michael Parenti, frankly, and Eduardo Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America, specifically on some of the root causes.
Michael Parenti, somewhere he's in a restaurant specializing in salt.
Even now, I love that man, but he used the same line in every speech. I saw him talk like I was his biggest fangirl in
Hey.
Portland. I swear to God.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I saw him talk like 5 times. He always used that line. It's a sad line. Anyway, I hope I never rely on old lines like this. Also, okay, moving on. What's happening in Mexico and in Guatemala and El Salvador has been spiraling out of control for more than 20 years, for 30 years, as the neoliberalist agenda, 40 years, as the neoliberalist agenda created conditions of extreme poverty, right? And we see this with GATT, we see this with, there was the Western states trade agreements that all predated the WTO. And all of those international trade agreements are a way to race to the bottom and to really kick out any support for the environment, for the earth, for protecting workers, workers' safety or wages. And so after those agreements kick out the support, what's left for the people, right? So the neoliberalist agenda has been creating those conditions of extreme poverty and then funding paramilitaries to fight any indigenous organizing or support of indigenous organizers. It was these neoliberalist conditions that really brought around the Zapatistas. And then we saw, in fact, paramilitary groups putting down, assassinating entire communities who may be supporting or harboring Zapatistas, as in the Actial massacre in, I think that was 1996. That was a Christmas Day massacre of indigenous people by a paramilitary organization. So the cartels now move in, replacing the paramilitaries. That's sort of a shift over the last, 15 years, 20 years. But there's always this constant power balance between municipal, state, and federal police. And no one really ever wins. The power just is always in a state of flux, and people without power are being used as pawns and trophies, and they're being hurt and killed. And that is the way that it has been throughout Central America and Mexico for 30 years or more. So U.S.'s disproportionate use of resources, as well as deliberate inaction in passing legislation to limit harm, hurting corporate competitive advantages, is a driving factor in climate change as well. And so we know that climate change plays into all of this. As storms worsen, as hurricanes batter the coastlines, as droughts make previously farmable land not farmable, it increases the misery and devastation and drives people away from their homes. And so again, while living large in America may be one of the primary causative factors in climate change, we're really one of the last to suffer consequences. Though they've finally begun, we've seen that in the fires through the West, the hurricanes that have battered the East Coast, water emergencies in the Bay Area recently. Still, it's not like the monsoons in Bangladesh that have really killed thousands.
I think it's an important frame that you're bringing up there. I mean, the subsidies to the oil corporations at this point are human rights violations.
Yeah, absolutely.
The climate is, right now it's misty in Portland, and I suppose we're all hoping that the historic drought just east of here isn't going to result in fires this summer. No way it's going to result in fires. I think I mentioned last week, I've ordered a generator. I've refilled my water tank. It's a horror, but we have to face it and deal with it as best we can. And the idea that the fact that oil companies around the world, but most especially in the United States, are getting, not only are they dodging taxes, but they're getting untold billions directly from the U.S. taxpayer. It's and they rule us, have no doubt. You know, when push comes to shove, that's who the senators answer to, and not you and me.
Really?
And, I mean, you know, just pardon me for being Captain Obvious here. That's the way it's working out. So, what are we going to do? We want a better world. Of course, that comes down to organizing and political action, and eventually, I think it will come down to serious general strikes.
Well, just to get back to the immigration and the human rights, I mean, serious general strikes, non-cooperation with a system that's killing the planet and killing us all seems like the only reasonable thing to do. But to specifically drill down for a moment on again what's happening and the causes of migration. Specifically, by advancing the interests of global giants, the U.S. ensures cheap and subdued workforces abroad and people who will work cheaper than anyone in the U.S. could possibly afford to work. The trade agreements like WTO work to make sure that poverty level wages rule the day. And against all of those terrible conditions, people see they have no option but to flee for their lives. We hear stories from the people who are fleeing El Salvador and Honduras about the conditions that they are escaping, where they have been kidnapped, where they have been tried to be induced into gangs, where they have been assaulted, where family members have been killed, where all of these things have gone on, and these people are fleeing literally for their lives. They come north and they hope to get into a country who is rightly responsible for the whole, well, maybe not all of their suffering, but let's just say a huge amount, a whole lot of their suffering. A country that famously has the statue in a harbor with this, giant woman holding up a torch that had a plaque put on the pedestal some years after the original statue was put up, but still. That plaque, which I learned in grade school and was proud of as an American, that the second stanza of that plaque reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." So that's a poem. It's called Colossus, and I know it's corny and I know it's trite, but my mom's family came here from England, the most privileged of countries to immigrate from. I'll go ahead and give that. And yet, they did immigrate after World War II. They were broke as a joke in England, I'm just going to say. I come from a long line of charwomen. And even so, even as privileged as coming from England as they were, one of them was held up at Ellis Island for months in a detention center because he had a disability and was in a limbo sort of state. They weren't going to let him into this country, but they weren't sure they were sending him back. And what do you do with him then? I don't know. But there was that. And I grew up with these stories, right? And having to sing that poem in 5th grade choir class or whatever that was, I felt so, it did something, it's like me and this other kid whose family had come from Mexico. We talked about it. We talked about being those, these first generation kids and that feeling that it gave us, this sort of proud sort of feeling that this poem gave us. And so I say that because it is with all that in mind that when I see Kamala Harris say, "Do not come," to people who are desperately fleeing for their lives.
Kamala Harris.
Do not come. Just do not come. I mean, how fucking dare she abdicate all U.S. responsibility? All of that, all of the misery that the U.S. has created. How that she abdicates our responsibility, that she ducks all accountability and just spews out that line as if it were that simple. I find that enraging. And before Harris made that statement, thousands of people have immigrated to the States and are awaiting their hearings as if they were criminals. They are awaiting their hearings in inhuman detention centers. I want to look at what ICE detention is. We've all heard about abolish ICE, but really, have we stopped to think about why that's important lately? I want to just, for a brief moment, check out ICE detention centers. There have been multiple serious issues about them. And I want to point out that even federal inspections have turned up serious issues of food safety, food spoilage, rotten foods that they say can cause harm to human health. And that has been found often throughout the privately owned ICE detention centers. So there's issues of food safety, sexual abuse, lack of access to health care. There's been beatings, cruelly low temperatures causing migrants on the southern border to refer to them as helarías or ice boxes. There's been all of that and more. And also left over from the deliberately cruel policies of the Trump administration, there's still more than 1,000 families that remain separated, right? That's left over from the deliberate separation policies of 2018 and 2019. The parents were deported alone, mostly to Central America. Their children have since been with some guardians, sometimes in detention, group facilities, sometimes in foster care settings, or occasionally with a relative in the States. That's over 1,000 families still separated. And frankly, they're not sure if they're ever going to be able to reunite the majority of them, thanks to a policy whose cruelty was in fact the point. And I believe the last administration said that that was necessary to discourage people from coming. So that's where it's sitting with me when Harris goes to Guatemala and says, "Do not come." It's not that far away from the cruel separation policy. It is absolutely tone deaf, and it dodges all American responsibility. That she further offers this sort of entrepreneurial idea, like, "Hey, ladies, you can just come up with a home business and get out of this poverty," again, shows a lack of understanding, or, well, I just want to say it's a lack of understanding, or she's just full of shit. I don't know. One of the two.
Why choose?
Why choose? Why choose? Because I'm going to say, in my very limited travels in Mexico, there is no cottage industry left unexplored by women in poverty. Women in poverty around the world are resourceful and attempt to figure out cottage industry and home businesses and support each other in micro ventures. This has happened around the world for a while. We don't need any woman from the U.S. Stopping by and giving a little pep talk to women in poverty, whose poverty, in fact, has been created by our neoliberalist policies. So I'll leave it there for a minute, Teresa. Carry on. What were you going to say?
Well, what I was going to say, actually, as it turns out, I scripted something very similar about that SOP. That was infuriating. So I'll just go ahead and read it when I get to it. But ICE is still dangerous for other reasons. Those are Trump's shock troops, and they are still very much loyal to Trump.
Absolutely.
When I warn about the danger of Trump, I'm not talking about what you can see. I'm talking about the big lie that is still circulating and very, very much among those armed soldiers in ICE who are furious with the belief, firmly held belief, that the election was stolen, that the current democratically elected Democratic president and many of the other elections were fraudulent. They desperately want to believe this for reasons that I've brought up in previous broadcasts, which devolved to the end of demographic white supremacy. But actual lived white supremacy is very much in force, and they want it increased to a complete apartheid state with elections basically devolved into performative stunts. That's where they're going, and there is real danger of violence not from ICE officially, of course, but from the people who are getting together right now on Telegraph and other forums and saying, we have to do another January 6th, and this time more violent. You can believe that sort of thing is going on.
Well, and that has a whole lot to do, again, we mentioned this last week as I think one of the most important stories we hit on for last week. And that was the convergence of Trump stating that he believes he'll be returned to power.
Reinstated, he says.
Reinstated.
Look at the hashtag.
And at the same time, Flynn was saying, yeah, Myanmar-style coup would be great here. Right? And so, yeah, moving forward from there,
okay, well,
we're still not out of the woods.
I agree. And before I get into more scripted remarks, I want to say we very much are interested in your chat comments. Go ahead and comment. And we figured out how not to wipe them out with the YouTube system here. So very much interested in what you have to say.
We have figured.
So I want to talk about meritocracy. I scoff at meritocracy, and even at those hardworking achievers in big tech and big medicine. And why? Because the idea that the U.S. is a meritocracy is unscientific and even anti-scientific. The idea of a meritocracy is a strong selling point for everything from financial products to popcorn. It's practically a religion in the United States, particularly in the sanitized suburbs of the economic top 10%, where smart cars drive smart people driving smart water on their way to a smart workout. And because of class, and I am talking about class, and because of the way that race has been used to oppress people, this is very much about whiteness, and it's about racism. And that's Libby back there. She is insisting that I put more anarcho-socialism in this script. The idea is that we have achieved, that they have achieved their status, and they deserve their status by way of hard work, lifting themselves up by their bootstraps and or displaying the cultural superiority of their family and religious traditions, and that the obverse is also true in their estimation, that the poor and the homeless deserve their misery in parallel with this thinking the dirt street nations have earned their punishment. In this paradigm, in the meritocracy paradigm, history, human nature, and the power of human mental plasticity disappear in favor of a narrative that neatly beatifies the powerful. It's disturbing, even to the Range Rover set that the U.S. society is so obviously disintegrating. But like most people, they go with the political flow and hope it all works out. Maybe a greater emphasis on STEM education will save the poor, they muse, as Rachel Maddow pontificates on the wall-sized television and the kid works his way through a Mozart piece on the Kauai for the 17th iteration today. Where is that smart food delivery truck? Maybe the smart Alexis knows. If there were ever any such thing as a true meritocracy, it wouldn't look like this, not least because one of the great human merits is compassion. We rightly criticize 20th century America for its segregation and poodle skirt patriarchy, but I'm old enough to remember when there was not a beggar at every major intersection, when tents on sidewalks were unheard of, and doctors were revered for their dedication rather than for their Ferraris. We talk a good game with meritocracy, but when I attended kindergarten, the kids weren't expected to show up with 2 languages and brown belt status. Yet, at that time, American science was unparalleled. Poor kids who walk into public school at the age of 5 today are already 2 years behind their affluent compatriots, and they are certainly not entering a meritocracy. Most of them will never catch up, and then they'll think of themselves as lesser for failing to enter Yale as freshmen. The game is rigged against them more so than in 1970, measurably more so. Meritocracy is anti-scientific. The assertion that the USA is a meritocracy is just another ruse to excuse the grotesquely racist and classist hierarchy we live in. 100 years ago, it was phrenology, the idiotic and anti-scientific idea that a skull shape defined intelligence and other qualities desirable and undesirable. The assertion that meritocracy is justifying our historic maldistribution of wealth is just as pseudoscientific, taking its conclusion from conditions in the field to justify its assertions, rather than working from a hypothesis forward. It's comfort for the comfortable, and no one should be fooled in believing it. This consideration is important when you consider that we live in the worst distribution of wealth ever. Kings and emperors in the roaring 1920s can't touch it. And I say this so that you'll become more aware of it and maybe spread that awareness, because it is a poison in our minds. And the thing that brings out the love in my heart for my fellow Americans is their qualities, their true merits, as I said, compassion. That's the biggest thing for me. But just living their lives, being human, being fascinating human beings. That's what life is about, and it's not about this achievement of status. One of the things that makes us American, has the cat cracking up.
I'm sorry, there was a cat-dog interaction that... Never mind.
Yes,
Carry on.
we missed it. Well, I mean, it's just this meritocracy idea just degrades us severely. And one of the ways it degrades us severely is we don't talk about it and we don't think about it. It's right there. This is a very class stratified society, and to hell with the justifications for it. It's not right. The pseudoscience of meritocracy has brutal consequences in the real world as police forces consciously or otherwise take it as gospel. Who is more classist than a cop in the USA? And where after centuries of oppression is class more bonded to race? The stench of meritocracy extends to international relations as we see, and now I'm going to repeat what you said, as we see Vice President Kamala Harris throwing a sop to young entrepreneurs in Central America as if Guatemalans somehow lack spark and the desperate migration north could be stopped with a generously dispensed good idea. The U.S. could stop migration in its tracks by arresting every graduate of the School of the Americas and paying war reparations. In terms of food, cash, and agricultural assistance, for example, establishing cooperatives out of the feudal fincas and helping move the coffee crops up the volcanoes because of global warming. But don't hold your breath. History shows Guatemalans would have a better chance of breeding flying pigs than seeing Tio Caiman, Uncle Sam, actually do the right thing. VP Harris is just Tia Caiman, if you ask me.
It's true. And as we were discussing our program, my comments were written to go after yours. I realize. So, but carry on.
I'm flattered.
Well, it's what we discussed last night. But then this morning happened.
Yes. Well, so we have the Democratic Party in power, and the Democratic Party likes to talk human rights. And as a transgender woman, I don't want to be a hypocrite. It's a lot easier to move with Democrats and under Democratic hegemony than under Trumpian reactionaries. I'm grateful for that.
Well, and I think that actually, I'm going to back up a moment there. Because this is something that I remember from the Obama administration, right? Where I felt strange, frankly, being, first of all, feeling relieved that we had Obama in office when I know that he was carrying out atrocious, acts of war in the Middle East and drone warfare and all the deportations and all of the other things that we know he was doing. But all of a sudden, my life got easier, right? As a queer woman, there was somebody in the White House actually talking about, my life like it might be worth something, like LGBTQ rights were a thing, women should have autonomy over their bodies, like pot smokers shouldn't be jailed forever, So there were things that felt very good to me.
It makes a difference. It's real.
And it really did make a difference in the quality of my life. And at the same time, he carries on neoliberalist policies that devastate the planet and devastate everyone, really, ultimately. And so, again, I feel like as we have moved into the Biden-Harris administration, we're caught in this sort of false dichotomy of either loving everything they do because they're not Trump, and we know how bad Trump was, and they're not him, so gotta love them, or we say, there's no difference between the two parties. They all work for the elite, and they'll all fuck us over, and so fuck them all. And neither of those positions are accurate, right? I think that there is marginal difference. In fact, actually, it's marked difference between the two parties at this point. And there is a strong plurality of true progressive voices, radical voices, actually within the Democratic Party, generally known as the somewhat increasing in numbers squad. And that said, we still have Biden and Harris going about doing their neoliberalist crap, right? Going to Guatemala and telling the ladies to, just get some entrepreneurial chutzpah together.
Yeah, I think we just saw the face of Harris, the prosecutor, there in the dais in Ciudad Guatemala. Democrats are just as imperialist as Republicans, if not more so, and they'll blast foreign GLBTQ persons to drone hell along with everyone else where it suits multinational corporate ambition.
Yeah.
So pardon me if I don't think corporate America is going to walk away from all those lithium, bauxite, and copper billions buried inconveniently under the Afghans. The CIA and other three-letter warmongers will try to maintain a rump state somehow in Kabul, even if it means a new Berlin airlift. If you're wondering what that looks like, look at Tegucigalpa and just how much of that is actually a U.S. airbase. And the meritocracy, smart Americans, the educated 10% who populate the gentrified districts in the new suburbs, are more than willing to look at the other screen as they work out on their smart exercycles. And the beggars had better not get too pushy in the parking lots, or it'll be smart bullets ripping through their already crippled bodies. And what can you say the smarts? Poor choices, say the smarts. More money to police departments for sensitivity classes and armored personnel carriers, say the smarts. Racism, oh heavens no. Everyone has the same rights to buy a Tesla, $1 million condo, and a Tony Club membership. This is not to say I prefer the competing narrative of the Trumpoids who think that what we need is a good old fascist fundamentalist coup like Franco's to rule over us and to permanently terrify anyone who's not a cis white evangelical male. They don't have the education, or they reject the education that they have to say Franco. So they say Myanmar or Myanmar, but their meaning and intent is clear. Consider me implacable against the civil war they are ignorantly, belligerently brewing. The alternate narrative to the metastasizing apartheid state should be a redistribution of wealth from the bottom up, starting with meaningful cash reparations to BIPOC persons. That would uplift the entire society. That would make our lives so much better. All of our lives, my white life, will be so much better after reparations. But that utopia is exactly what the white evangelicals for Trump want to fight and kill to stop. And the terror of that world is why they cringe at the phrase human rights. They would rather be white supremacists in hell than prosperous citizens of an egalitarian state. So that's my written remarks.
Yeah, that really hits home. And that whole, all of our lives improved. As we uplift each other, all of our lives improve. As we support the planet and each other, all of our lives improve, right? To actively oppress is to degrade everyone. Of course, the ultra elite don't see it that way. They see themselves in this cute bubble, and somehow or another they're going to end up with the most toys and win. We're not sure exactly how that works or who declares the winner.
Can I talk about what wealth distribution looks like? Will that interrupt your
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I've been in Cuba, and they, as I was saying, they just don't have much money, but they distribute it very well. And what that means is the level of anger and violence in the society is way down.
Right.
There are places in Havana might be a little violent, but in Santiago, in Las Palmas, and in the city of what's the name of the U.S. base?
Guantanamo.
In the city of Guantanamo, which is not Guantanamo Bay, it's up the cliff from there. And in the countryside, you could wake up as people do at 3 a.m. and take a walk and just go look at some beautiful moonlit thing. An hour's walk from where you're at, you can go down any alley, you can go up any countryside. You're not going to be targeted by cops. You're not going to be shot. You're not going to be chased down by some landowner's dogs. It's peaceful, and that is worth more than any sum of money. And we get, and even some of the Cubans get, paralyzed by the sight of wealth. And, they come over here thinking that they're going to have a good life. Well, they might. Depends on what they define as a good life, but the countryside, the nation of Cuba is peaceful in a way that Americans will never know. If I got up at 3 a.m. and walked into the park here, we have a beautiful park near I'm at. I'm grateful for it, but that would be quite dangerous. There are people trying to sleep there, and some of them are deranged and desperate from years of deprivation and oppression. You just can't do it. It's not the land you live in, and so for most Americans, you don't know peace.
I'm gonna possibly push back.
Okay, well, go ahead. Tell me.
I've walked most places around the city most of my life, all hours. I don't live in fear that. I don't do that. I tend to, say hi to people and try to get to know them. That's true. That I also, just try to be respectful, and I go in, with my senses fully engaged. But I've had this conversation with a whole lot of people in my life, and maybe I'm just less afraid.
That's a good attitude, and I think you're good about that. But it's not the same. It's
I know, I agree, it's not peace, but
peace is
Carry on.
wonderful, and I recommend it.
Yes.
and we don't know it here.
yes, I totally agree.
Is it time to slow down and shift over to intuitive?
Well,
considerations?
no, I still was going to talk about other stuff.
Oh, let's talk about that stuff.
Oh my goodness. We're just all over the place this morning. We do thank you for being with us. This is now Bridge to a Better World. This is the live stream that Teresa and I started back in October, recently sort of accelerated into a new phase by the fact that Facebook, for whatever reason, decided to kick us to the curb. So we've lost the first several months of videos. We do have most of the audio archived on SoundCloud. Should you like to revisit any of our past episodes, please do so. You can find them on our SoundCloud page. We are This Is Now, Bridge to a Better World. One of the topics we've revisited from time to time is reproductive rights and what that means. And we were just talking about Central America, and that brought to mind the other story this week that really got me thinking about many things. And that is the story of Sarah Rogel. She is the Salvadoran woman who just served 9 years of a 30-year prison sentence for a miscarriage. She reported to a hospital after having a miscarriage with bleeding, and they decided that, she had attempted to induce an abortion and therefore needed to be put in jail because that would violate El Salvador's basically zero abortion allowance. There's no circumstances in El Salvador that you can ask for an abortion or receive an abortion through. So there's a lot of women in this country talking about, oh my God, a lot of people in this country, I should say, talking about, oh my God, this is horrible. We can't let, that's out of hand. That poor woman serving 9 years. And as if that can't happen here, as if that doesn't happen here on a regular basis. And so I wanted to just sort of spend a moment reminding people that it does happen here, and it's been happening here. So Chelsea Cheyenne Becker gave birth to a stillborn baby. She was charged with murder. I think she might have had some traces of drugs in her system, and therefore was charged with the murder of her baby through intoxication and exposing a minor to drugs. There are so many specific instances of women who have been charged with murder. There's a case in 2014 of, and these are all cases that have been allowed under Child Protection Acts and Fetal Protection Acts. And they've been going for about the last 10 years, really strongly. And we need to actually understand what those are when they're coded and they come up, right? A stillborn child, a charge of murder in the disputed case of law on fetal harm. So I just want to read for a moment from a ProPublica article from 2014, citing the case of Rennie Gibbs. She's a 16-year-old Mississippi woman who gave birth to a stillborn child. She faced life in prison because at some point during the pregnancy, she had done some coke. And therefore, she was prosecuted for allegedly endangering her unborn child. Her daughter was a month premature when she was stillborn. The stillborn infant, the stillborn fetus, was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around the neck. The cause of death was listed as the umbilical cord being wrapped around the neck. And yet, within days of delivering the stillborn, the 16-year-old mother was arrested because her blood test had contained a trace of a cocaine byproduct, and therefore state prosecutors ruled her offspring's death a homicide caused by cocaine toxicity. Whether or not, that actually had anything to do. Near as I know, having some coke in your system doesn't cause an umbilical cord to wrap itself spontaneously around a fetus.
Well, no, I mean, it's hypocritical bullshit, obviously.
And so there are many of these cases that go on, generally targeting women in poverty and generally being unjustly applied and disproportionately applied to Black women and Indigenous women.
Surprise.
So I just really want to say that this is nothing new to this country either. And if you're outraged about the case of Sarah Rogel, and you should be outraged about Rennie Gibbs, about Chelsea Baker, and about so many others. Pavi Patel was one of the first that I became aware of. We did a few programs, Positively Revolting programs, Lynn and I, around the case of Pavi Patel, who has been released. She only served a year and a half of her 20-year sentence after having a miscarriage.
That's just unbelievable.
And so this is happening. It's happening around us, and it's happening now. And be aware. That's pretty much all I want to know.
Well, I've got to say that the abortion thing is it's very performative. This is for Republicans to pose and to ignore the fact that they hate human life and they hate human rights, and they want to live as rulers and crush everyone under them. And ICE is a perfect example of that. Republicans just absolutely love this, but to absolve themselves in their own minds, they have this ridiculous fetus worshiping thing where they pretend that they really care about these unborn citizens and that they are the pure emissaries of God who are being crushed. And so then they turn the finger around and they say, you're baby killers. This is what this is about. It isn't a concern for human life or human rights at all. And that's demonstrated by the fact, and you know what I'm going to say. I mean, once your baby's born, well, good luck, because Republicans would rather see it die than allow any reasonable proportion of the state to ensure its feeding and education.
Oh, sure. And, the same pro-life folks are anti-mask, pro-war, pro-death penalty, anti-public support, anti-child care.
You're not fooling anyone, white evangelicals. We see you.
We see you. And what you are is pro-control over femme bodies, basically, over uteruses. I would say just control over women, but that does not actually take into account trans men. But then it occurs to me, you'd like to control trans people as well. It's the same evangelical ruling factors. You'd like trans people to just not exist, and women to be barefoot and pregnant. So I see it's all of your mindset, and we see you. And this has nothing to do with safeguarding the precious fetus. Nothing.
I could say a lot about that.
Carry on. Go ahead if you want to.
Well, I've seen it in my own life. I remember the white cis male Christian surgeon who operated on me when I was 13 years old because my ovotestis failed. And it was going to kill me. It had to be removed. I can give you details, but it was shocking and painful. And they took it out, and then they acted with disgust towards me as if I'd done something wrong. It confused the hell. I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I knew deep within myself, and by that time I had learned to be very closeted, that I was female, that I was feminine, that I was intersex, and I didn't know the word intersex. I didn't know the word transgender. No one around me did. All I knew is that people were really mad at me for this medical condition that had caused me great pain. So the intersex part, not the only intersex part, it was later defined, was removed, and I didn't actually find out. The Air Force found out that I was intersex before I did, and that was the reason for denying me when I was desperate in between the Imperial Wars. I tried to get a job with the Air Force, and I would have been accepted as a legacy because my dad was an Air Force sergeant, and they were ready to do that until they got the report from my surgeon. And again, the disgust, the confusion. Here I was in my 20s, trying to get work, and all of a sudden they kicked me out with an excuse, and I was just like, "What the hell is going on?" And it wasn't until years later, and I found out what was removed from me. That is how insane the patriarchy is. It's like it can look at the evidence of an intersex individual and is so offended by it, is so flummoxed by it, that it will hide it and act in this way that I've described.
The evangelicals.
I just can't take it. And so I kind of enjoy being in the face of evangelicals in that way. It's like, here I am.
And make no mistake, they want to bring in a theocracy, to this country, and they are making their alliances with the GOP. In that, as Teresa and I have mentioned, the war that they seem to want to bring down. So just to be aware, not in a way of like scare tactics or anything, but just to be aware in that theocracy that does seem to be around the corner again. I feel like we sort of successfully, or have successfully anyway, beat a theocracy back about 20 years ago with the rise of Bush the First. We were really seeing a strong incursion of theocracy at that time, but we sort of beat it into submission. But I think it didn't actually go away. It just sort of has been hiding, behind a door and gaining some strength. And now it's sort of leaping back.
Yeah, it's like that's pretty obvious now if you really look at them. Brooding resentment, and it's dangerous. It's smoldering, and we have to wonder just how it's going to explode. Not whether, but how. What's coming up next?
What's coming up next? Indeed. And so to that line, are we ready to sort of wrap? You want to wrap?
Yeah.
Let's wrap.
Okay.
All right. What I just to sort of wrap then, let's say this about that. I think that the news can really get people feeling pretty cynical and disappointed, right? So here are the cards that I got for today. Let's see here, in no particular order. We'll just we'll do like this. We'll go like this. Okay, so first of all, I want to say this is a new deck for me. This is the Modern Witches Tarot deck, and I want to thank Dina, my really dear friend Dina, for giving them to me a couple weeks ago.
That's a nice one.
I know, I love this deck. I was anyway. Thanks, Dina. So to say that we have been falling into cynicism, it's disappointment is pretty accurate, right? And the story of this card is that there's a lot that has been upsetting and that has gone wrong. But if you focus specifically and only on that, you miss the opportunities that are still there. So while the person, I've always said, while the person cries over the spilt wine, she's missing the cup being offered to her. And so think about that and how that might apply. And that really does go part and parcel with the Knight of Wands. The Knight of Wands talks about really seizing an opportunity, and especially one that is very given and tied to your will, to your sense of power, to your personal purpose, right? And so there's something that's really, we're sort of clouding our own spirits. We are occluding ourselves because of the heaviness of the world, right? We are really wanting to turn inwards. I know that's true for me a lot this week. And it's been true for a lot of folks I've talked to. And yet we have to know that there are things to do and ways that we can make a difference right now. We need to find those opportunities again and go forth. The knight doesn't really do it very cautiously, and that's kind of, again, backed up by the fool. The fool knows that if you're on your path, you just go. And so looking for the opportunities, taking chances, and moving forward innocently enough, right? It's not so much the destination so much as the journey. So knowing that, our next action may not actually bring the liberation, but in fact, they're important acts to take for the chain of liberation that we are in. We are a link in this chain that goes on for generations. And so we take the action that we need to take that's tied to our soul's purpose. And we have to really guard ourselves against falling into cynicism and despair, because that's not going to help anyone, right? Cynicism is soul death. And we just can't have that. We can't afford that. Not now, not ever. So it's time to keep on keeping on. And it's important to, again, check in with that sense of purpose, look around, and really find a way for you to take some action this week that's going to be meaningful for you and is going to help pull you back into a more active cycle. Because we are, after all, facing solstice. Solstice is just like in a week and a half. And that is the high point of energy at this time of year. And it feels a little incongruent to me that we are at the high point of solar energy. And most of my friends and certainly myself are just feeling a little like, oh my gosh, a little tired. Right? We've been facing so much that it seems like it's exhausting just to get through it, especially as changes happen right now. Things are reopening, and that is sending all kinds of mixed messages, and it seems threatening, but it seems liberatory, it seems exciting, and it seems scary all at the same time. And so in this time, again, what the cards say, definitely what I'm feeling is look for the opportunities to make a difference. Check in with yourself about your soul purpose and move forward. Don't succumb to cynicism. It's really time to take action and embrace the changes around us. Be a part of what drives those changes.
Is it AniRaven.com?
AniRavenHaines.com.
AniRavenHaines, HAINES.com.
We've been married for 27 years. She's got to get my name right.
And I have rarely met someone with the depth of knowledge of Tarot and other witchy subjects. So AniRavenHaines.com if you want to see more of that. And if you have encountered people who listen to our radio shows for decades that we broadcast them, and I've encountered people who are saying, where the hell did you go? It's a long story, but here we are. And so help them out by hitting that, let's see, it's like and share and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, poke those buttons for us. And
wait, no, smash them.
Oh, yeah. Obliterate the virtual buttons on there. And that's how we'll get around because it's pretty small right now. We're also going to be on SoundCloud. I've skipped weeks and weeks for that, but this time I've got the audio working. I'm looking at it now. It's a good setup and should pick us up pretty long. So I'm going to edit that down and try to get on SoundCloud today. It'll be This Is Now Bridge to a Better World, same as this broadcast.
All right. And with that, we will see you next week when Teresa will be a year older.
Oh, that's right.
Are you going to say it? Aren't you going to say it,
Teresa? I got to say it.
Teresa?
Okay, my love goes out to all of you and to all the ships at sea.